Well, guys, actually we will be talking about fish-like organisms, and truthfully, the organisms we talk about today are not true fishes, but they get the name hagfish, and in the case of the lamprey, many people mistaken them for true fish. Well, guys, welcome to online lecture 6B here in your Biology 112 semester. In online lecture 6B, we will just cover slides 2 through 11. So we're not going to get too far. We're basically just going to go over the basic features of vertebrates. Then we'll look at two classes, class Myxini and class Petromyzanthidae, and then we'll just fall short of class Chondrichthyes, which are your jawed cartilaginous fish. So we won't get quite that far there, guys. We'll just go up to slide 11, and as you can see, we'll be looking at just general characteristics of vertebrates, etc. So let's go ahead and start here on slide 3, looking at these general characteristics. Try to explain each one of these, make sure that this all makes sense to you, and then we'll move forward. We'll also see some videos. One video is going to be on hagfish. One video is going to be on the sea lampreys, which you may be familiar with, or maybe not. These guys are not things you encounter a lot in nature. So starting off here, slide 3, let's look at all the chordate features that vertebrates possess. So vertebrates are chordates with a backbone. Invertebrates lack a backbone. Now, we saw that there were some invertebrate chordates. So yes, there are some of those, including your lancelets and tunicates. So lancelets and tunicates, or cephalochordates and urochordates, those groups, they are truly chordates that do not have a backbone. So we do have some of those, but most chordates are vertebrates. So most chordates have a backbone. So they have the 4 chordate features, which, can you remember what those are, guys? Yes, the 4 chordate features are the post-anal tail, right? Then they have the dorsal hollow nerve cord, they have the notochord, and they have the pharyngeal slits. So we have those 4 things, plus they have the vertebral column, which is the most obvious thing, hence the name vertebrates. Can be something like a spinal cord. It could be actually made of bony vertebra, or it could be cartilaginous vertebra. In some cases, it's even more like a cartilaginous tube. And then we have the cranium, which, of course, you know the cranium encases the brain. It protects the brain. It's up towards the anterior end. And basically, since it's there, it does allow for a more developed brain that is protected. And, of course, this is going to continue on our theme of cephalization. In fact, the development of the cranium is going to lead to more extreme cephalization, where the sensory organs and neurons will be really concentrated in the anterior region. If you remember, this is up towards the anterior region of the organism. Now moving on to the endoskeleton, notice we have for the first time an endoskeleton, where the skeleton is actually within the body, within the animal's body. And this leads to appendages typically. Most vertebrates have 2 pairs of appendages that branch off of this endoskeleton or are part of that endoskeleton. Again, they can be either made of bone or cartilage. We'll see a lot of them just hang on to cartilage and never develop bone. Some of them we think may have been able to develop bone before, but then lost that ability for different reasons that we're not totally sure of. Now, in an endoskeleton, remember, you actually see the bone and the cartilage are going to be growing within the animal, and so minerals, etc., like calcium and phosphate, will be added to the bone, to the cartilage, especially bone, directly. So there's no molting. So the skeleton grows from the inside, it gets larger, and there's no requirement for molting. Those minerals are added directly to this bone or cartilage material. Next, we have the neural crest. The neural crest is a group of embryonic cells found on either side of this thing called the neural tube. So the neural tube, which is something that's found in early stages of development, we see the neural crest, these groups of embryonic cells found on either side of that neural tube during that early stage of development. And then what happens, guys, is these embryonic cells then disperse throughout the embryo, where they ultimately will help the development of the endoskeleton, especially the cranium and other parts of the skeleton as well. And then we get into the diversity of internal organs. We see that in vertebrates. We see, instead of just a few basic internal organs like a pharynx, like an esophagus, we start to see things like, liver, which is going to be playing a role in regulating blood sugar level, breaking down glycogen into glucose, turning glucose back into glycogen, also secreting things like bile for fat digestion, kidneys, which concentrate liquid wastes to remove liquid waste. That's a big step towards living in a terrestrial environment. I don't know if you guys realize that, but kidneys have a major role in allowing you to live on the land because they help you to do what? That's right, they help you to retain water, and they get rid of your liquid waste efficiently, especially things like kangaroo rats. They can really concentrate their urine and lose very little water in the desert where they're found naturally. And then endocrine glands, like your thyroid gland, adrenal glands, your pituitary. There's lots of different glands that arise here in these vertebrates. And they also will have a heart. So this is the first group where we have a true heart, which could have 2 chambers, 3 chambers, or 4 chambers, like we have. Birds, mammals, and even some of the reptiles, including the crocodilians, have 4-chambered hearts. So these are all features of vertebrates. And of course, the vertebrates are the groups of organisms you're most familiar with. So the good thing about all these things is this all should sound fairly familiar, and most of these things you can actually picture in your mind. Here's the big picture, guys, the evolutionary picture. So when we look at the vertebrates, notice everything up here is a vertebrate. So from here all the way over to here, from left to right side of the screen, everything is a vertebrate. They all have a vertebral column. They all have a cranium. They all have an endoskeleton. And you can see the first group that branches off are the cyclostomates or cyclostomata. These include lampreys and hagfish. And we'll break them down into the hagfish, class Myxini, and then the lampreys are Petromyzontidae. So we'll have Myxini and Petromyzontidae branched out within that. They don't show that here, but that does in fact fork. But we could say both of them are in this group called Cyclostomata. These guys have a very simple vertebral column, as you'll see here shortly. And technically, hagfish are not considered to have a true vertebral column. We'll see that really is in the lampreys. And technically, the hagfish don't really even have that. We'll get to that in a minute. Then the chondrichthyes, these are actually jawed fish. So from here on up, everything has a jaw. These lampreys and hagfish do not have jaws. They are jawless fish. But from the chondrichthyes on up, which chondrichthyes would be your sharks, rays, and skates, from them up and on up, you can see everything's got a jaw. And then we have the bony skeleton, lungs, which makes them more adapted to the land. We start seeing the ray fin fish and the bony skeleton. And then we see the lungs showing up in the lobe-finned, well, the lobe-finned fish still have gills, but the lungs will then show up finally in amphibia. The lobe-finned fish, what makes them a little bit more sort of advanced is the fact that they have fins with muscle tissue in it. That's going to be a big step up, you say, from maybe the ray-finned, because having muscle in your fins is possibly a step towards developing walking appendages for the land, like what we see in frogs and crocodilians, mammals, etc. And then we see limbs develop. We start seeing that in amphibia on up. Amniotic eggs for the reptiles, birds, even mammals are considered to be in that group there. And then milk and hair is what distinguishes the mammals. And you can see the names, gnathostomes, or things with a jaw. So again, everything from the shark on up has a jaw. osteichthyans, bony skeletons, lobe fins, again, muscles within the appendages. Tetrapods means 4 limbs, and which include like 2 legs and 2 arms typically, and then, or could be 2 legs and 2 wings. And then the amniotes, which are highly adapted to the land. So once again, we're seeing this progression of aquatic toward terrestrial as we go from left to right, as we see development and evolutionary processes going on here. This is just a zooming in of what we had just talked about. Again, you can see more clearly where the lines are drawn. So you can see what are amniotes, what are tetrapods, what are lobe fins. This is good, guys, to have in your mind. You should really kind of get this outline ingrained in your mind before the test for sure. So get comfortable with that. Notice there's a lot of overlaps. So for example, if you're an amphibian, you're a tetrapod, but you're also a lobe fin, you're an osteichthyan, you're a gnathostome, and you're a vertebrate, all of those things. Here's a good picture of all the different classes and characteristics of living vertebrates. Again, from cyclostomata all the way on up. This is a great summary. We'll be going through every single group, but in today's online lecture, we're going to focus on the cyclostomates. You could just say cyclostomates, this class cyclostomata, which include lampreys and hagfish with 100 species. Again, they're all jawless. They don't have true appendages, as we'll see. There's only 100 species. We think they were maybe more abundant in the past. Notice sharks, rays, and skates, they've been around a long time. Most people believe they go back to the Devonian period, which is a period before dinosaurs. About 970 species, maybe not quite as successful as they've been. 27,000 species of the bony fish, which makes this the most diverse class. So of all the vertebrates, the most successful are the bony fish, Actinopterygii, or what are called the ray fin fish, but they are basically your bony fish, which was an old class called osteichthyes, which they don't talk much about anymore. The lobe fin fishes include the coelacanths. There's only 2 species there, and the lungfish is 6. Traditionally, we used to think coelacanths were just 1 species. That's probably a pretty recent development. And then you can see 6,000 frogs, toads, salamanders, 310 on turtles. Not super diverse there, but that body plan sure is helpful. Lizards, snakes, pretty diverse there. Crocodiles, alligators down at 23. Birds are at 10,000, but still not even close to seeing the diversity we see with the ray fin fishes. And then mammals are only 5,500, believe it or not. All those animals you've probably been most interested in growing up are not the most diverse, only 5,500. And so we say for all vertebrates, that's approximately 50,000 species, more or less. It's pretty close to that. So even the total number of species of vertebrates pales in comparison with what we saw in some of our invertebrate groups, where we had classes like class Insecta in the hexapod group there. They just are in the millions probably. So it's just amazingly diverse in those others. So let's go ahead and look at the hagfish, class Mixini, and then we'll watch a little video. So class Mixini includes just the hagfish. Now these are not fish. What, Mr. Spath? They're called hagfish, but they're not fish. Yes, because they lack eyes, they lack jaws and fins, and even technically vertebrae. They just basically, their skeleton is very simple. It consists basically of a notochord, a cartilaginous skull that encases the brain. So they are what we call craniates, because they do actually have a cranium, a cartilaginous skull. This cartilaginous skull and the lack of a vertebral column allows them to really bend. As you can see in this picture, they're extremely flexible. And you can see here the kind of downsizing. Perhaps these guys have maybe had some features, like maybe they did have eyes before, maybe they even had something like a vertebral column. But for their lifestyle at the bottom of the ocean where they eat dead things, just, they have a, real toothy kind of tongue, kind of like a radula, and they basically just scrape away dead things. So bottom dwellers, basically eating, dead things. They're true scavengers, is what you might call these guys. So again, jawless, finless, marine fish. They are exclusively in seawater, salt water. The notochord, again, cartilaginous skull. The notochord, that should be a C there, guys. There's a mistake there. Somebody put notochord, but notochord and cartilaginous skull together work to give them some support. They're basically blind, but they have a very good sense of smell where they can pick up those dead things. And yes, they do produce slime. That's their main defense. You see, guys, they don't see. They can't move very fast. This makes them very vulnerable. So, you know, any organism that looks completely innocent, look out. They'll probably produce either toxins or some type of annoying substance. In this case, it's slime, which I'm going to show you a picture of that in just a minute. So, again, very powerful tongue. They just scrape away at dead flesh all day long. Kind of nasty. Let's go and see if we can show a video. Yeah, let's go ahead and go to the video now, because most of you have not seen a hagfish. You may never see one your entire life alive. So let's go ahead and check this out. Let's look at this little video on hagfish.
Rather avoid white slimy creatures from the depths of the ocean, but for some folks, it's their job. Like Eddie Kispaluti. He's been collecting specimens for the Scripps Oceanographic Institute for the past 10 years. Today, he's got a date with one of the most repulsive creatures in the 7 seas, the one they call the slime eel, the hagfish.
Holy cow! Look at this! Oh my goodness! Wow! There are a lot of hagfish in here. This is absolutely the grossest thing I ever have to do here at work. I mean, look at this stuff. That is just freaking foul. Ugh. That is a lot of hagfish right there.
Scientists are fascinated by these creatures. That's why Eddie collects them for Scripps.
This animal was around way before the dinosaurs, and whatever they're doing it right, because they're still here.
Hagfish are actually among the oldest creatures on Earth. They can't see. They have no jaws or venom. So how did they survive so long? They owe it all to slime.
The second you grab them, they just scream right out of your hands. So we have to kind of use tools to transfer them from the trap into a container. Okay. Look at how many times you've done this. It creeps me out every time. A couple stuck back there. They can't even get out of their own slime. Look at that. We're going to give it a bit of a hand here. Reach way in here. This is the bait. It looked like a perfect mackerel just 12 hours ago. The hagfish go into it, eat it from the inside out, and it turns into that. And I can't hold it anymore. That's just foul.
Foul as they may be, hagfish intrigue researchers because they're among the only species that can regulate their oxygen intake, sending oxygen to specific parts of the body. Another reason scientists at Scripps want to study them.
Hagfish are amazing animals. They're fish, but they don't have any scales, doesn't have any fins even. They're more like an eel. They have this cartilaginous type skeleton, and it's not a hard, bony structure like something you and I have in our bodies. It's incredible how long these animals can go without feeding. Maybe 6 months or even longer. They're spending most of their time just waiting for that seal or dolphin to land next to them so that they can sniff them out and start chomping away at them. All right, feeding time. It looks like just the thing that a hagfish would like to bury its little rasping teeth into. Let's go put it in the tank. All right, hagfish, come and get it.
Hagfish may have no mouth nor teeth, but they can take a dead fish apart in hours. They'll even enter the rotting carcass to have better access to the soft meat under the skin. They scrape away at the flesh with tiny raspers, almost like a file. But what makes the hagfish really fascinating and really repulsive is clearly the slime.
We've set up a little baby pool here to demonstrate completely non-scientifically just how slimy these hagfish can get. It's freezing cold. So just by disturbing the hagfish a little bit like this, I'm not really squeezing, I'm just kind of putting my hands down on top of them, and any little disturbance gets these guys going. This is so weird. But there you go. Just by touching them, moving them so slightly, they've created this amount of slime right there. Along the side of its body, it's got these slime glands, these white glands right here. It squirts out this protein, mixes with the seawater, and then creates this big slimy mess. It's a defense mechanism. If a predator comes in, it grabs the hagfish like this, and it's trying to eat it. The hagfish swims out of the predator's mouth. The predator's left with this big, gnarly, snotty mess in its mouth.
That snotty mess can actually suffocate the attacker. The fish dies choking on slime.
To you and I, this is absolutely repulsive. But for the hagfish, this is the defense mechanism which has kept them alive for 500 million years. Hopefully they'll be doing it for millions of years more.
Okay, guys, so the first group here of vertebrates, class Mixini, the hagfish. Hope that was rather entertaining for you. I always find that little video pretty interesting. So let's move on to class Pectromyzontidae. So, or class Pectromyzontidae, some people pronounce it. Let's go ahead and begin here, slide 8. So moving forward, let's see, I'm going to get my toolbar up here. Let's make sure that's working here. And there we go. Just want to make sure that's going so I can do my little pen there. Okay, so let's move on to this next group now. Moving kind of on up, and again, we're still in Cyclostomata, but we're now in a different class. We move past Mixini, Pectromyzontidae, the lampreys. The lampreys have a really interesting life cycle. Many of them start out as larvae. So they come out of an egg in a freshwater environment. They exist as in a larval stage for, say, even as long as 3 to 7 years, where they feed on very small organisms like little invertebrates, maybe even some dead materials like detritus. And then they eventually become sexually reproducing adults and oftentimes go into the ocean, dwell in the ocean environment for a while, and then migrate back into the freshwater to spawn and die. So all their spawning is typically in the freshwater, not the marine environment, although they may spend a very large amount of their time in the marine environment. So they have very interesting life cycles. They lack hinged jaws and true appendages. So they don't have true fins, and they do not have jaws at all. They are truly jawless. They used to be in a group called Agnatha. This used to all be called class Agnatha, which means without jaws. Like gnathostomes, right, as we said before, those are vertebrates with jaws. Agnathans do not have jaws. Well, that makes sense because all these guys do is attach themselves to usually live fish. So they are truly parasitic. They attach with that raspy tongue and toothy kind of opening there at the top of their head, and they just sort of, like a sucker, attach the side of a fish and begin to suck out the fish's blood, internal body fluids, and even small pieces of tissue. So yeah, they're annoying if you're a fish. They don't usually kill the fish, but they certainly can weaken the fish. They have a notochord and a rudimentary vertebral column. So, unlike the hagfish, which have absolutely no vertebral column, these guys actually have a cartilaginous, circular, kind of like a column of cartilage where the nervous tissue runs through. So you might say they have a very simple vertebral column. It's certainly not a vertebral column that has individual bony vertebrae. This is just like a tube, guys. Picture like a cartilaginous tube, and then the nervous tissue runs through that. So let's now move on to the next slide, a little bit more about these guys. Here's a great picture of that toothy mouth area. Again, no true jaw here, but you can see these projections along the mouth here allow them to attach to the side of a fish. As you can see here, this is actually a sea lamprey feeding on a dead fish, but they typically are are true parasites where they feed on living fish, and they attach again to the side of those living fish. They actually cause a big problem in the fishing industry. Guys, you're going to see that very shortly. We got a clip of that coming up. So again, we think this is one of the earliest divergent groups of vertebrates, probably not quite as old as the hagfish, but they would have been probably the next group that diverged from those. These guys are found again in marine and freshwater, sometimes both throughout their life cycle, as I had mentioned. And again, the marine lampreys particularly are parasitic as adults, and that's the most famous group of lampreys. Really the most successful group of lampreys are the marine lampreys. Again, parasitic as adults, spending their early years as larvae in the freshwater, becoming adults, going out in the ocean, feeding there, then migrating back to spawn, and then to ultimately die in the freshwater. So they start out in the freshwater, wind up there in the end. And these jawless fish, including these ignathans, probably lived for a good 300 million years. Most biologists would say that. And they all eventually became extinct at the end of the Devonian. Now why? Because we started seeing the jawed fishes beginning to pop up. And as the jawed fishes begin to appear, they begin to outcompete these guys. But in the case of the lamprey, this life cycle, this lifestyle works pretty well for them. All right, so let's move on here to slide 10, just kind of get a sneak preview of where we're heading, and then we'll watch the video here in just a second. So moving on to the gnathostomes, we start looking at jawed vertebrates. So every vertebrate group that we look at from here on out are going to have the jaws. So they have hinged jaws developed from the pharyngeal arches. So remember, you have the pharyngeal slits, guys. That's one of your chordate characteristics. Well, you also have the pharyngeal arches between those slits. And so that is that's a big step. We can see that the arches that probably evolved in the jaws would be gill arches 3, probably became modified to form a very simple hinged jaw. So, you typically think of, say, anywhere from 8 or 9 gill arches, say probably 9 arches in most cases, and then you have about 8 gill slits. And it looks like over evolutionary history, probably arches 1 and 2 may have just sort of been reduced or even lost, and then 3 is the one that became a simple jaw. But then we also see gill arch 4 is also modified to become a even more powerful jaw, a much bigger jaw. So we think the arches, again, these pieces of tissue, typically cartilaginous tissue between the slits, is what may have developed in the jaws. Evolution would have sort of modified existing feature, the arch, to become a very effective weapon, a jaw. Some gill arches were lost, some were modified. Again, I gave you some specifics on that, which, of course, there's some great pictures showing you that. You guys go ahead and go into slide 11. We can see exactly what that looked like. So we start out with 9 arches as typical. There are exceptions to that, but and then 8 gill slits. But that's what we think probably occurred in the real primitive jawless fish. And again, 1 and 2 are lost, so we lose these first arches here. They're gone now. And then 3 becomes modified, forms this simple jaw, and then gill arch number 4 eventually joins in, and we get a much more powerful jaw. That 4, if you can see, gives the extra leverage, extra support there to the jaw, making them much more powerful. So all the modern jawed vertebrates, we think they probably got those from both gill arch 3 and 4. So this leads up to the chondrichthyes, which are truly jawed fishes and very much jawed vertebrates. But we'll hold off on that, guys, for another online lecture, or actually in-class lecture. But let's go ahead and look at the sea lampreys and see what they have done to some of the ecosystems, especially in the Great Lakes.
In the depths of the Great Lakes is a scene reminiscent of a nightmare. Slimy, snake-like creatures with suction cup mouths lined with rings of sharp teeth and a rasping tongue prey on the trout, salmon, and whitefish that live in these lakes. Sea lampreys are the vampires of the deep.
Here's a good lamprey, Mark, on this whitefish.
The effects of one of the most notorious of the Great Lakes invaders dates back to the 1950s, when the lamprey virtually wiped out the commercial and recreational fisheries in the Great Lakes.
A fish is seldom able to free itself from a mouth like this.
Since 4 out of the 5 Great Lakes straddle the U.S. and Canadian border, both governments are fighting these silent invaders with every weapon they've got.
Our battle is constant, and we can't let up.
One of the most important weapons in this battle is lampricide, a chemical deadly to the lamprey, but non-toxic to humans, other mammals, and fish. They attack while the lamprey is still in its vulnerable larva stage.
Without question, this is the most important program to the Great Lakes. Without this program, we could not make progress towards lake trout restoration.
Lampricide is highly effective in small streams like this, but the mother lode of spawning lamprey come from the St. Mary's River. Here, a yellow granular chemical called balucide is planted in the riverbed below. It causes the lamprey larva to emerge from the mud, ingest a super concentration of the toxic chemical, and die.
Anytime we can reduce the number of lampreys, it's going to help all species of fish.
But even before the spawning season begins, thousands of captured adult lamprey await their fate. This is where the males will be sterilized, one by one, tail first. The lamprey is sucked into the heart of a robotic machine. A biologically active chemosterilant called Viscir is injected into its belly.
If there's 100 sterilized males in the river and 100 normal males in the river, females in the river have a 50-50 chance of mating with a sterilized animal, and so, in effect, we will reduce reproduction in the river by 50%.
The sea lamprey has lived in the ocean for nearly 300 million years. It entered the Great Lakes through man-made shipping canals. Anglers and commercial fishermen have been severely affected by its invasion. This $7 billion a year industry is protected by the efforts of governmental bodies to the tune of $20 million a year. Canada spends $8 million a year fighting this pest. It's your concern and tax dollars that keep our Great Lakes protected. So stay informed and stay involved in this daily battle with the silent invaders.
Okay, guys, you can see what sea lampreys have done, and it's really not just the sea lamprey. We had a whole lot to do with that. You know, human beings are the ones that made the connection between the ocean and the Great Lakes through canals, rivers, etc. And so we introduced them more or less to the Great Lakes region, again, probably even a little bit before the 50s. And this, of course, led to devastation in the lake trout population particularly, and any species. These guys will grab on the sides of any fish, weaken it, and, of course, eventually that weakened state helps them or causes the animal to eventually die. They don't want to try to kill the fish. They typically just want the blood and the body fluids and some of the tissue, but that certainly leads to them in a weakened state, leads to their death eventually, or premature death, or even just simply less egg production, less reproductive success. So guys, yeah, we see some environmental issues coming up, and we'll see that as we go throughout the vertebrate groups. Human beings have had such a big impact on vertebrate populations. That's one of the reasons the numbers are as low as they are, guys. We are partly to blame for the lower diversity that we're finding in this group. So guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. If you have any questions, just email me at mspath@wpcc.edu, or simply bring your questions to class, and just don't have any nightmares, please, about lampreys or hagfish. I know this stuff's kind of scary, and if you're listening to Fall 2014, this is in fact Halloween, and so how more fitting than to have a lecture like this. See you guys in class.